Hey everybody, my name is John Lamb, and this is Shakespeare Off the Shelf.
John Lamb, John Lamb, John Lamb, John Lamb. Let's talk about Shakespeare, Shakespeare, Shakespeare. For how long? As long as it takes, but no more than 11 minutes.
Today, I want to give a longer explanation for the question of why editions matter. I did a short about this. This is the long-form explanation. If you enroll in a Shakespeare class, there's almost always a particular edition selected for that class. Here's the New Cambridge Shakespeare edition of Love's Labour's Lost. It's one of my favorites. There are others like the Norton Shakespeare or the Oxford Shakespeare. There's a huge variety. I have them over here on a shelf. And instructors in Shakespeare classes almost always select a particular edition, and they usually do it for a particular reason. And almost always when I teach Shakespeare, I am either asked why we have to have the same edition, or students think that they can just buy any edition and that it's the same thing. My answer is always something like the following. An edition of a Shakespeare play is like an interface on a particular electronic device. The difference between the Cambridge text and the Oxford text and the Norton text and the other Norton text and the other Oxford text and whatever else, the difference from edition to edition is like the difference between Mac operating system, Windows operating system, Linux, you name it. And that's because the edition is designed much like an interface is designed. It is, in fact, designed as an interface. It's designed with particular users in mind, with particular use value in mind. It has certain features like, for example, the David Bevington edition of Shakespeare, which is one that I taught from for many, many years, is much more friendly to undergraduates. It offers a lot of paraphrases in the glosses. It offers a lot of footnotes that provide basic historical information that students might not be aware of. By contrast, the Arden texts, which are standalone single text editions, they're the ones right here, are much more scholarly. And so often you'll get, a handful of lines, and then the rest of the page is footnotes, fairly lengthy, usually scholarly. The introduction is itself a kind of book-length thing. And there's a whole range of editions between those. There's also so-called school texts, which are editions made for students in secondary school. And then, of course, with digital interfaces, that has duplicated. So the Norton Shakespeare has a whole digital infrastructure. The Cambridge Shakespeare just rolled out one that I'm a fan of for reasons I'll go through in a minute. So the difference between edition and edition is like the difference between one operating system and another. But the thing is, this metaphor, which is not really a metaphor, it goes deeper than you might realize, because it's not just about footnotes, glosses, page size, or whatever else. It's not just about those obvious affordances of an edited edition. Here you see, here's the text, and here's the footnotes, and here's the so-called collation formula. It's not just that those differ from edition to edition, although they do. It's more meaningful. So think about it this way. Inside any computer or phone or tablet, there is computing action taking place, and it ultimately reduces to a set of ones and zeros. Only the interface is what gives us access to the computing process. And I'm indebted to my former student, Suzanne Tanner, who got her PhD and wrote her whole dissertation about Shakespeare and interface theory for some of this language. Something similar is happening with Shakespeare's plays. And that's where it gets really interesting. There's a whole field of editorial theory, and books and articles have been written on this. Ink has been spilled over these kinds of questions about what an edition is. And here's why. An edition is not granting you access to Shakespeare's brain. I'm really sorry to give you that news, but it's just the case. What an edition is meant to do is to create an interface by which we access the earliest texts of the play. Here's a picture of the first quarto of Love's Labour's Lost. That is not what a modern edition looks like. I have just shown you what a modern edition looks like. There is, to a certain extent, a whole edifice, a whole interface separating us from the earliest texts. And the reason for that is that these earliest texts, which were printed on the hand in what's called the hand press era, were not printed by Shakespeare. They were printed by printers. Shakespeare did not exercise a great amount of control over the texts as they were printed. And there are lots of what we would call, incorrectly, errors. There are lots of variations across these printed texts. And there are lots of really sort of puzzling features that scholars have been studying for a long time. Probably the most famous of these is the difference between the first quarto text of Hamlet and the second quarto text of Hamlet. The first quarto text reads, "To be or not to be, aye, there's the point." It's only when we get the second quarto text published after the first quarto, that's why it's second, do we get "to be or not to be, that is the question," the more familiar and canonical Shakespeare Hamlet soliloquy. These variants are interesting in their own right, but the job of an edition, for better and worse, is to reduce the amount of complexity and noise in the earliest printed texts, and to try to identify and, let's think about it like a curation or a user experience design. An edition is meant to normalize, to regularize, and modernize a lot of the language that occurs in these earliest texts. So we need editions, not necessarily because they give us access to Shakespeare's brain. That's like saying the Mac operating system or iOS on your phone or whatever operating system gives us access to the computing process. That's not really correct, even though it is in some ways doing it. It's representing to us computing action in a way that is meaningful and useful for us for the things we want to do with the device. That's also largely true for Shakespeare editions. It is making Shakespeare's text meaningful to us. It's making it available to us. It's providing access of a certain kind and of a certain complexity or lack of complexity that we will use.